Welcome to Hardfire, Libertarian Issues in Focus on Brooklyn Free Speech Television. My name is Sacerdote. I am your sometime host of Hardfire TV. Thank you all for tuning into our show. Today we have on our show Michael Weiss to help us figure out how better, more local ways to provide for electricity. I find this a very personally interesting topic because I've struggled to go off-grid for some years now. Mike, welcome to our show.
Thanks very much for having me, Derek.
Anytime.
Pleasure to be here.
So we hope to discuss many areas of interest regarding electric generation, transmission, and distribution with a skeptical eye towards the way it's being done today. First of all, you're a solar site analyst.
Yep.
Can you tell us what that is, first of all?
I'll go out to buildings and just see how practical it is for them to have a solar system installed on the roof. You know, so it's a very kind of technical visit, just the condition of the roof and how much solar access it has, and the basement electrical, panels, and how the system would be intertied, and then also some tariff. Analysis, what the electricity is going to be worth for that building.
When you use the word tariff, like in this context, what does that mean to a person who's maybe considering going solar?
Yeah. If the customer, the utility customer, would go to install solar, they become what's called a customer generator, and their solar generation is going to be worth a certain amount of money, and that's decided by the tariff, which is controlled by the Public Service Commission, which orders the utilities to compensate the customer generator for that generation.
I mean, so yeah, it sounds very complicated, but just to break it down for people, if a homeowner or gets solar, goes to Home Depot and gets that solar installation that they're trying to always sell you, gets it on their roof, they're not providing their own electricity. They're selling that electricity to the local provider, and then they're essentially buying back, and they're getting credit for what they generate. So it's not like the stuff on your roof is powering your house. That's a misconception people have when they first install.
Yeah, I like to think of it as, there's always this analogy to hydraulic or water systems, and that the electrical grid, is a pressurized system like a reservoir. So any generation is going to add to that pressure in the reservoir. So even distributed generation like that will be, supplying electrical pressure to the system, and it gets delivered wherever there is load, so wherever there's draw sort of in the reservoir. So the person's electricity, on their roof is providing the electrical pressure that is supplying their house. And it could overproduce what's in their house and then get exported to the grid too. So the systems that I look at are grid-connected systems.
So in other words, you could potentially make a profit if you can collect a lot of solar energy on your roof, and maybe you don't use that much. You could potentially make a profit just by having the panels on, and then even paying for them. You're still making a profit.
Yes. Yeah.
So what would be, for a layperson's perspective, why would it not be simpler for somebody to install their solar panels on their roof and just be disconnected from the system, and they're supplying their own power? Why the need to interconnect with Con Ed and not just cut them out of the picture?
Well, that's a really good point. So they're expensive systems, solar, and the payback without any incentives, you're probably looking at a 20-year payback just for that initial outlay to buy the panels. They're not cheap. They're maybe they're going below $1 a watt at this point. And I think typically an apartment on an annual basis will use 3,000 to 4,000 kilowatt hours. So they would need about a 4 kilowatt system, 4,000 watts. So $4,000 just for the materials, and then installed cost in New York City, you're probably looking at $3 to $4. So to save that much in your electricity,
you're talking about $3 to $4 per watt.
Yes, per watt. Okay. So if you're looking at a 5 kilowatt system, $20,000. That's probably over 20 years you'd spend that $1,000
to save that in your consumption. Okay.
So if you go grid intertied and you become part of, in our case, Con Ed's grid, there are incentives. If you're not grid intertied, there really are no incentives from the city, the state, or the federal government. So the big incentives for a grid intertied system is a tax credit, a federal tax credit of 30%, and a state tax credit 25% of the cost of the system, and then property tax abatement in New York City. So there's significant incentives.
That sounds like a big incentive.
Yeah. So that's the city and the federal government and the state, really sort of pushing to get these systems intertied. But then, like you say, that's different than kind of being islanded and just self-sufficient and not connected to the grid. There's a big difference there. And of course, if you're connected to the grid, you have electricity all the time. So your system, if it's not producing, you don't have to worry about not having supply, because Con Edison will be supplying electricity. Whereas if you disconnect from the grid, you can rely on that live production of the solar panels or stored electricity if you have batteries.
So you would have more trouble, for example, like every night would be a challenge, because if you'd have to constantly monitor your usage.
Yes.
Am I running my AC too much at night because there's no sun out? So you're not concerned about that because the system is
providing. Yeah.
However, I suppose if you have a blackout, if you had an off-grid system, you'd be good. Whereas if you're interconnected, you have nothing coming to you. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both ways of doing it. So let's look at some of these issues. From your on-the-ground viewpoint, you manage a co-op of 70 apartments,
yes,
4 buildings, and how large is the system?
6 buildings. It's a 50 kilowatt system.
Okay.
So we produce or we offset about 40% of our electrical consumption on an annual basis.
That's respectable.
Yeah. So sometimes we'll be exporting. In the winter, obviously, we'll be pulling almost all the power from the grid. Mm-hmm. But it's about 40%. It's pretty lean building, not a lot of electrical load. So
how do you make it such a lean building?
I think just by default, the era of the building, 1920s, no elevator, kind of simple common areas, so not a lot of electrical load, small apartments.
And there's not a huge draw of air conditioners, their ventilation is good enough.
It's pretty decent. Just by happenstance, the geography, we're up on a hill and surrounded by a park. So there's definitely it trips up in the summer. I guess it just about doubles the consumption if we hit a heat wave. Mm-hmm. So it is significant for sure. But it's it does a pretty respectable amount. And there are buildings that are offsetting 100% of their electrical consumption. So it can be done. It's really the size of the system on the roof to the that ratio to the load in the building.
To the use. And I imagine would that be newer buildings having a time doing that, or older buildings?
I think not necessarily. Older buildings, probably a 4-story and below. Those types of buildings can kind of hit 100% of their consumption, and if they are pretty efficient appliances and lighting.
And as panels get more efficient, they may even go up. Okay.
Yeah, the density sort of goes up, right? The power density. So, but the thing it can't touch, like in our building, if you look at energy altogether, I think our electrical makes up maybe 15% of the energy consumed, and the rest is fuel. Natural gas.
Mm-hmm. And so will not offset that.
Yeah, if we go towards electrification and
electric
heat pumps, then you can kind of do that. But it's a lot of you need a lot of generation. Like we're sort of almost have maxed out our roof, but we're offsetting only 40% of our electrical.
There's no place else to go.
Right.
On the vertical walls or something of the building. It might be illegal.
And maybe
I don't even know.
Yeah. Well, walls you can do. Yeah. Just all it has to be Department of Building. Approved.
So, I feel like for the what we call it, the generator customer.
Customer generator.
We're kind of limited by the fact that there's only one way to sell. So it's not like we have choices of who's going to buy our electricity and how. And there's only one way in which it can be transmitted legally, I suppose.
Yes.
So I assume there's some politics about this that you can speak on.
I think it's distribution, right? And I guess it's sort of sunk costs, and I think you get into that sort of category of monopolies and infrastructure where it's just so expensive to have a distribution system, like to have redundant wires in the street. I don't know what that model would be, but I think
high fixed costs.
High fixed costs.
Yeah.
That's sort of the model that happens to work. But I guess there was some. There was an organization sort of playing around with like a blockchain and selling units of electricity on a market where other people could buy it in the city, in Brooklyn. And I don't know how that'll go. There might be some promise there, but I guess you'll always be using sort of the backbone of the utility.
That was my
grid.
My question. Like, how would it be if you don't allow a second set of wires, so to speak?
Yes.
I mean, where you still have somebody in control of the.
Yeah.
And someone is going to charge their rates because they're a monopoly.
For delivery, yes, yeah.
Unless we could think outside the box, like years ago before we had cell phones, we used to think of like one set of wires. How could there be all these competing phone companies? And now, of course, that's a laughable concept. But we don't go by wires anymore. Maybe we're thinking too much inside the box by thinking that we have to go by transmit in the way that we've been transmitting for 100 years.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you never know sort of what's going to happen.
What potential is out there.
Yeah.
So you're speaking about micro distribution, and what would have to change publicly in terms of policy that would make the environment more favorable to these small distribution networks that you're talking about?
I think they are. I think it was a pilot project with the Public Service Commission, or maybe Con Ed, with the blockchain, although I'm not positive of that. But I believe they, sort of tolerated that. But it's sort of a little misleading because there's still the delivery charges. Mm-hmm. Somebody's still paying for delivery. It's almost a little, I think they're kind of projecting into the future, a possibility of something that might be. But at this point, it's piggybacking already on the cost of delivery. So there's no real savings. I think for the person who's buying somebody's solar-generated electricity, they're just paying an extra cost, sort of like ESCOs or energy supply companies.
But their ESCO would be their neighbor?
Yes.
I see. So
So I think just as a matter of faith or belief in the promise of it, they're willing to pay more to just experiment with the system.
That makes sense. Really, like the idea of buying local. Buy from my neighbor's solar power as opposed to someone upstate or interesting. Yeah, I mean, many of the green energy alternatives are, when they were first pushed, they were often more expensive than. And they would stand out in the street and try to get you to sign up, and they're telling you you're being good for the planet, but you're going to pay more.
Yes.
And they sort of guilt you into still signing up for it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the solar, at least through the incentives, there's real savings there for the consumer or for the customer generator. So it switches that kind of paradigm where you're paying more for green energy. There's the upfront cost, but you end up saving the money ultimately. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you were just to go with an ESCO and pay a premium price, just for your environmental beliefs or whatever reason you happen to have, you would just be paying extra money.
And you wouldn't really have any control because, that price could fluctuate wildly one day to the next.
Yes.
Based on whatever they're doing in their company. Interesting. So, who stands to gain? Who gains by public utilities being managed the way they are today? And who do you feel would gain? What parties would stand to gain if it was decentralized? If there was the potential for more competitive distribution systems? If we could abandon the wires sort of in the street, I would assume the consumers would certainly gain by that, by sort of the choice and just a wide open market. If technologically that was feasible, and maybe it's just a matter of time before it is, and we can just transmit energy, sort of like cell phones through the air, then I think anything. That's a very disruptive, idea. Like anything happens at that point, right? It's all kind of like all bets are off at that point.
Yeah. So if a distribution system was able to be set up like that, I think just consumers by choice, or because having that choice would benefit from that, and it certainly would hurt the delivery system, the distribution, the utilities.
Yeah, there would be almost no need for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like the ban in copper lines,
Right.
in buildings for
Yes,
telephone
and
systems.
telephone buildings and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now they make condos and stuff out of those buildings.
Yeah.
Retrain the workers. I mean, as it stands now, the challenge is that electricity cannot be bottled and stored. That's, in my personal struggles. You generate a lot of power on a sunny day, but usually you may need that power, say, on a humid night. And it's, people think in terms of, well, let's just charge a battery, but there's a huge amount of loss. As you know, batteries cannot store very well. So what do we do to account for that fact? The fact that we really can't hold the electricity that we were making to the time and place when we need it.
I think the battery technology is getting better, for sure. Who knows if electric vehicles will really, get a big part of the market? But I guess there's some promise there. I think University of Delaware years ago did a study about a vehicle to grid energy storage, so sort of doubling the use of a vehicle, not just for transportation, but also if that vehicle was parked, which I guess they are maybe 80% of the time. Or
so
whatever.
they're charging, and they're being charged, and that same car battery is then also
delivering
part of the grid since it's just sitting around.
Yeah, I think Nissan's got a vehicle coming out that does that, capable of that, and I'm sure the other manufacturers will start to do that. I think the energy storage technology or the chemistry's getting better. I guess that's where the real hope is for real breakthroughs there. As it stands now in New York City, it's really challenging to get energy storage approved, within buildings, mostly lithium ion. The lead acid or the AGM batteries are much safer as far as explosions or fires, so they're not as challenging to get installed. But most of the new batteries from the manufacturers are lithium ion because I guess they have more cycling capabilities. They're just sort of better performing. But then there's other energy storage technology too. There's pumped hydro.
Like a water tank on the roof.
Yeah.
It's simple, but I thought that would be more effective.
Yes, yeah. And they do that, big reservoirs, in a big way, but outside of a city, of course, where you have a reservoir a couple of miles away from the hydroelectric generating station, and where times of low demand, you pump the water back into the reservoir uphill. So there's a bunch of different storage technologies, but that's a big part of really firming up the renewable generation for sure, where you get variable generation, right, with solar or wind to make that more dependable. And there's an interesting technology with the molten salt, and it's solar generating, but it's mirrors a concentration solar, heating up salt. I don't know, a couple thousand degrees, I think, which I guess and that makes steam from water, which turns turbines.
And that would take in energy, and then as it turns back to salt, it would give off the energy.
I think the benefit of once you get the salt so hot, it keeps the heat for hours and hours. So the idea is you heat it during the day, and it can generate electricity through the night. So it's sort of a buffer.
Its own cooling process.
Yeah.
Salt more than water. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, but batteries, the industry's definitely looking into it and really trying to innovate, and they're getting, more ubiquitous, more so outside of cities. Vermont had a program where they were installing batteries in homes, distributed storage, so the utility could draw on that distributed stored electricity remotely.
So in other words, like I had, say, 12 batteries in my basement, and if they needed more energy at a certain time, they could control access to my storage from far away. Yeah, you hit on a very interesting point, in terms of the variable usage. Now, in a real market, something is in higher supply or the price goes down. In higher demand, the price goes up.
Yes.
Now, obviously, electricity, the demand is very variable. It would depend on the weather, depend on the time of day, and so forth. Does the does the customer, there's a customer generator. If they are able to generate electricity at a time when it's more in need, do they capitalize on that fact that they can, provide at a time when, let's say, for example, someone was able to take their panels and tilt them with the sun, and they could extend their day.
Yes.
Could they, in theory, make more money, per hour?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's a new tariff in New York State, which is really designed with time of, temporal and a spatial, like where it is on the grid and what time it's producing and what time the load is on the grid. So the new tariff in New York State is this VDER, or Value of Distributed Energy Resources, and it's really designed to capitalize on that, the demand and supply, and so it values electric generation when it's needed. So they'll actually you can opt into sort of an option of that tariff where only the solar production from June through September is valued, because the rest of the year is electricity is so cheap.
Mm-hmm.
The real value for Con Ed and the distribution and the delivery system is, the stress to the grid is between June and September. So the solar for the whole year will be valued on the performance of the system during those few months.
I'm assuming because of air conditioning.
Yeah.
So if you're a user, essentially, if you're more of a consumer than a producer, it would make sense if you could find a way to use more of your electricity in the winter months, because in theory it should be cheaper to you.
Yes.
It makes a lot of sense. And you were talking about location. Would it be advantageous to be in a place, like for your home or building, to be in a place that's near a place of high demand, or not necessarily?
Yes,
it would.
Absolutely,
it would.
Yeah.
So it's the distance by which you have to send the power makes a difference.
Yeah.
So there's some ability for the customer, the generator, to take advantage of the actual market.
Yes.
Which is interesting. So it's not full ability, because that one buyer still controls it based somewhat on market forces.
Yeah. Which I think is, I don't know the market, the independent system operator market completely, but I think the utilities will buy capacity, sort of a baseline, and then there'll be day ahead pricing, like by the hour. So that's sort of what determines the value. I think a big part of it is the hourly pricing.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes worth a lot of money. And summer afternoon months, historically, like that's the peak. I think between 4 and 6 in the afternoon.
That's when it's getting humid, but maybe less sun is actually going down, so it's more unpleasant to be inside. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, but now, just to be clear, these systems are, the building owner does not own these systems usually. It's owned by a third party, kind of. So
it's a mix.
Who owns the actual installation on the house?
It could be anything, and it's most beneficial, at least the current incentive sort of structure, because it's tax credit based. As long as you have tax liability, if you're an individual homeowner, personal income tax, that's where you get your money back through the federal and the state. So as long as you have income tax liability, you'll get that money back. So it's always to your benefit if you can own the system, and then of course you get 100% of the compensation for the electrical generation. If you do a lease, if somebody else, a third party, owns it and no upfront cost to you, which is also attractive to some people who just don't want to take out a loan.
Yeah, because like a neighbor of mine, she was thrilled because like they came to her house, and the roof was old, and the next day a roofer came through all the shingles, did a whole new roof.
Yeah.
She didn't go in her pocket one time, and she's still saving money despite have all this being taken out of her day-to-day bill. She's still saving money over what she had before, so she's thrilled by that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because somebody's kind of gleaning those tax benefits somewhere. Some tax investors somewhere.
Somebody is getting benefit, and she understands someone else is profiting, but doesn't care because she's still saving money somewhere. So it's interesting. It's kind of a complicated way in which it works. But
yes,
the money changes hands.
And there's it's great that there's several options out there. And another option that just came up recently within the last couple of years is a shared solar, where you could be a subscriber to a system that's just in the same load zone. Mm-hmm. So if you're in New York City, it has to be within the boundaries of New York City. But at no cost to you, there's sort of the solar developers will sign you up as a subscriber, and you can just get credit from their production, sort of discounted electricity. Mm-hmm. So that's another option that's new, and that was a regulatory approval to allow that in the state. It just is sort of virtual accrediting. Mm-hmm. So there's a bunch of different options for people.
I mean, once you begin to understand them, there are options that are advantageous to the consumer and homeowner. It seems like we're only down to our last couple of seconds. So Mike, do you have any advice for those who maybe want to go off grid or who want to do sell back? How to start, where to start, when to start?
I would get in touch with installers. Mm-hmm. Or there's CUNY, and they have resources, and there's a bunch of stuff online where you can look for more information. But definitely become educated about it. Mm-hmm. Because there's a bunch of different parts to it and different ways you can that could work for you.
Thank you very much. This is all the time we have. Thank you for coming.
Thank you,
it's been a pleasure. Thank you for watching Hardfire. And if you are interested in learning about libertarian issues, we have more than 150 episodes available online. Thank you very much.